Thank you to those who watched for your time. I'll introduce myself. My name is Andrew Welch. I'm the Vice President of the Cloud Application Platform practice here at HSO. So this is the global technical team responsible for cloud adoption, app transformation, infrastructure, governance, etc. across Power Platform, Azure, and Microsoft 365. So I post quite frequently resources, articles, that type of thing in this technical space there at my Twitter account there, and then you also have my email address as well. Azure, you want to go next?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Excuse me. My name is Azure McFarlane. I'm a lead consultant on the US side of the CAP team, and I work in Power Automate mostly.
Satish?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Satish Srinivas. I work at the CAP team also. I'm one of the cloud solution architects. Thank you.
And Lee?
Yeah, morning, everybody. I work as the technical director globally for the Cloud Application Platform team, specializing in kind of implementing Power Platform and Azure across financial services and highly regulated environments.
Yeah, and what we'll do is I'll do most of the upfront presenting, so to speak, and then as Pierre said, we've got a number of questions that have been asked, and that's why I wanted to make sure we had a good and technically diverse panel here that we can chew through some of those. So as we get started, I will say I'm going to reference a few pieces of kind of a few references, further reading, that type of thing as we go here. We can certainly send out these links in the with the email and in the chat as well. But I wanted to just share these with everyone so that you can go a little bit deeper on some of the content and some of the ideas that we're going to present today. So with that, I want to begin with this idea that about generational change in the way that organizations use, buy, and enable their success in the cloud. This is a huge transition that we are making, that we kind of the global technical and business community are making. And I don't take this lightly. So what I want to do is I want to begin with a historical analogy. I know it's probably a little peculiar to see an image like this in a technical presentation, a technical discussion, but what you see here is a drawing or a painting of New Amsterdam as settled by the Dutch in the 1600s. New Amsterdam, of course, would later be taken over by the English and would be renamed New York and would grow into New York City that we know today. But what you can see there down in the lower part of Manhattan, the lower part of the island near what's labeled on the map as the Battery and One World Trade Center, is this mess of tangled streets that double back onto one another, buildings built in sort of strange and random locations. And that is the legacy of New Amsterdam. That is the legacy of the original settlement that became New York City, where people essentially built structures, whatever you needed, a house, a farm, a shop. They built them in a field and they connected all of those things with roads. And what happened in the 1800s, around 1810 or 1811, is what New York called the Commissioner's Plan. And that was the street layout, the infrastructure, the grid, what became the grid of New York City that is very famous and very well known today. So numbered streets running roughly east to west, and then numbered avenues running roughly north to south, so that by the time, by the early to mid 1800s, even though the Empire State Building, for example, was a century away, we knew exactly where it could be built. There was a street corner, at least in theory. There was a design for an urban design that later innovations would follow, things like the New York City subway. But fundamentally, that plan, the Commissioner's Plan, remained. And so too it has gone in software, right? So if you're in a large organization or even a small organization, you've probably accumulated these vast piles of technology, some Microsoft technology, some not Microsoft technology. And what we're doing in this platform first era that I talk about all the time, and there's one of my pieces that I linked to earlier, is we're really untangling that pile, that mess of technology so that we can build a modern data platform and a modern application platform atop that technology that has been acquired. And sometimes that means retiring technology, retiring services that are consuming license or consumption costs but are redundant and are just not used in an effective way. So when we talk about the cloud application platform, of which Power Platform is certainly a part, what we're basically doing is atop this modern data architecture, we are building line of business applications. You see here the Dynamics, the Microsoft Dynamics applications, but also a portfolio of custom enterprise applications. And I'm not talking about 2 or 3. I'm talking about, in some cases, thousands and thousands of them, and then integrating them with services across Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365, and other apps and services as well. So say organizations that use Workday for their big HR, but are then extending that with applications across the cloud that have a people-centric nature to them. So when we think about, for those of you who've not, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because I think probably some are very familiar with Power Platform, but when we think about what Power Platform is and what services exist there, I always like to start at what I call the data layer, and those are the data connectors to tap into and connect with third-party data services, hundreds and hundreds of them, SharePoint in some cases, Dataverse for Teams, that's the building of applications and actually having a proper relational data service right inside of Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Dataverse, which longtime practitioners and technologists in this space would think of as being CDS, or even before that, we called it XRM, and then Azure SQL. So this is kind of a scraping of the top of the data layer. There, like I said, are hundreds more, but in general, the complexity and the security requirements and the ease of the implementation in the data layer go up as we move from the right to the left on this diagram. Power Platform then provides organizations with technical services to build solutions end-to-end. So Power BI for data visualization, business intelligence, charting, dashboarding, and data transformation in some cases as well. Power Automate to automate business processes, and also to build in what we call robotic process automation, RPA, which is kind of a last mile technology, RPA being a method for interfacing with old legacy technologies that don't have, say, an exposed API or don't have a better way of managing and moving data between services. Power Virtual Agents for automated intelligent chatbots, and then multiple flavors of what we call Power Apps. So mobile apps, web browser-based apps, and also externally facing web portals. So say a bank that is trying to expose data, customer data, to customers who are using a modern web portal to access their information. And then finally, AI tools, artificial intelligence tools that are built onto the platform as well. And then there are services that sit atop or adjacent to this that people probably know: Microsoft 365, Teams, more SharePoint, your office productivity applications, Dynamics 365, those are the line of business applications, say sales, service, project automation, etc. And then finally, custom business applications that are built that are very specific to the organization. So you take all of these technologies and they're all kind of wrapped around a data service that we call Dataverse. Dataverse provides a suite of security, data, storage, logic, and integration functions that in past times we would have to build from scratch every time we spun up a new application. So these exist today. They come kind of out of the box with Dataverse, and they enable us to reduce our app dev costs by up to 74% in independent research, and in my own maybe a little bit more conservative thinking, to reduce app dev cycle time by probably the 30 to 50% range. And then there are finally some capabilities that are tied directly into Dataverse, like model model and portal applications, Dynamics 365, and AI Builder. So these components require Dataverse. What I want to talk mostly about are business challenges, though, because it's really the business challenges that drive the technology in this new world, this platform-first world, not the other way around. And I see organizations seeking to solve 4 business challenges with this platform-first approach. The first are the meeting of new business needs, and tragic and horrific as the pandemic has been over the last several years, it certainly has presented many new business needs for organizations to take on. Early on in the pandemic, my colleague Lee and I worked with an organization that needed to distribute medical supplies and services around the world. So we were able to build an application with them to facilitate that process, and we were able to get that application from design on a whiteboard to production deployment worldwide in exactly 30 days. So that's what I'm talking about, these new business needs, things that you didn't have in your budget or that you didn't know you needed yesterday, but are rapidly emerging. Turning away from being more forward-looking to looking kind of in the rear view mirror here is this idea of sunsetting legacy technology. So as technologies come to their end of life, InfoPath, Lotus Notes, SharePoint, workflows, and apps, et cetera, there's so many of them. Organizations are turning to Power Platform as the destination for these legacy technologies so that they can retire technical debt, they can retire legacy licensing costs, O&M costs, infrastructure costs, and personnel costs. So we see a lot of activity here as well. Reimagining existing applications, I'll share an example here in a moment, but that's just this idea of apps and business processes that simply, they may not be at the end of life from a technical perspective, but there is a better way of doing it. So we're going to build that better mousetrap here. And then finally, the enabling of citizen developer productivity. And when we say citizen developers, what we're talking about are business users, people who, for whom IT and software development is not their primary job, who are actually building their own productivity apps and helping to reduce the backlog that IT organizations have as they try to build apps and provide service for an entire organization. Really has just proven to be not cost effective nowadays. So I've written more about this in the blog post that I've linked below there. So to share 3 enterprise scenarios, these are real scenarios that I've seen in the past, and I want to share them with everyone to kind of get you thinking about what's achievable here. So the first scenario that I love is this idea of app migration en masse. So think a large organization that might have thousands and thousands of workloads or apps or quasi apps in their inventory, say thousands of SharePoint classic workflows or SharePoint applications or InfoPath forms, access databases, et cetera. You're trying to migrate all of those en masse onto a modern, secure, properly governed cloud platform so that you can decrease your O&M costs of those applications, reduce backlog, and then in some cases, knit pieces together to completely reimagine those business processes as well. Next, we have this idea of modern apps for old data. One of the things, if you're familiar with the cloud adoption, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, you might be familiar with the 5 R's or the 6 R's. And it's this idea of rehosting, refactoring, rebuilding, et cetera. What's the correct approach to modernize your application portfolio in the cloud? And I think that some people look at this and they think in a very binary way about it. They think I can only go with one of these options, and that simply isn't true. So one example that I've seen employed to great effect is this idea of you have an enormous amount of legacy data that has been generated by your legacy applications over a period of time. We could migrate all of that data and completely re-platform that data, say by moving it into Dataverse, or we could park that data, say in Azure SQL, and then build modern applications on top of that. Oftentimes, data migration is the long pole in the tent, so to speak, when it comes to to an app development or an app migration or modernization type scenario. So not having to migrate that data, simply rehosting that data or leaving that data in place and then rapidly building modern applications on top of that is a perfectly good scenario to pursue. And then finally, is this idea of the monster app under the bed. So these are the business processes that firms just cannot seem to solve. So in one case, we're working with a highly regulated global organization. They had this immense regulatory burden surrounding requirements imposed upon them by the various jurisdictions, states, and countries with which they did business. So this is this idea of rapidly prototyping a solution, a new application to solve this kind of problem, and then expanding that out into additional lines of business as circumstances, requirements, and budget permit, which is very, very possible when we're working in a world where we're not just trying to pursue the big bang multi-year application development life cycle. So Forrester a while back did some research on this. Sorry for the noise of my opening a can of water here, but Forrester did some research on this a while back and found that the math works out as well. I think the numbers speak for themselves, but go read that Forrester report. These are their numbers, not my numbers. And when you take those four kind of high-level scenarios that organizations face, combined with the independent research about kind of the financials here, what you find is that there's a lot of value and benefit to platform adoption, but there's often a wall between you, the organization, and the benefits that the platform can unlock. And I see five of these types of challenges that organizations really struggle to overcome, and we'll walk through them right now. The first is around platform management. So a lot of times when I'm speaking with IT teams or CIOs, I hear all these things about how this is chaos. Are we monitoring this? Are we managing this properly? So platform management, and Microsoft has built a wealth of governance and monitoring and management tools that we can deploy on the platform to be able to properly build the guardrails that are needed for both citizen developers and professional developers to succeed and thrive on the platform. Next, we find enterprise architecture. So the platform really does fit quite nicely in the organization's broader technical ecosystem when attention is paid to enterprise architecture upfront. So we're talking about managing and integrating with existing identity provider via Azure Active Directory, building the building blocks that security and ALM will rely on, and then integrating the platform and the applications built atop it with an organization's existing data ecosystem. All very possible, very doable, and something that we're seeing organizations do all the time. Next is sustainability. How do we manage the application lifecycle? How do we automate wherever possible source control, deployment pipelines, best practices when it comes to DevOps and CI/CD? These tools exist as well. Azure DevOps is an excellent service for managing this, and Microsoft is investing very heavily in GitHub as well to promote modern automated ALM best practices. The mature security model, the platform comes with data loss prevention measures built into it, and it integrates across the entire kind of Microsoft security estate and suite of set of tools. So it's very important that organizations spend a lot of time with their security model as well. And then finally, user empowerment. How do we support this thing at scale, particularly when we have citizen developers or business users developing their own applications? So these are some of the things that we see organizations that need to overcome in order to jump that wall and get to the value that awaits them. So getting there is, I think, best thought of as a journey rather than a big bang, rather than a one and done. We're going to implement something. It's going to have a start date and a finish date and it's done. This is much more about putting your organization on a journey. I always recommend that you begin kind of in a clear-headed, level-headed way via assessment. Assessment is going to help you measure progress and measure business value on the platform. And this is all in the Power Platform Adoption Framework. I shared the link earlier, so you can look this up. So begin by clearly articulating and understanding your maturity as an organization on the platform and with these tools today. And then also building a roadmap of workloads that you're going to migrate to the platform that are going to deliver business value in the next, say, 1, 3, 6, 12, 24, and beyond number of months. Next, and this is really something that I see a lot of organizations trying to circumvent, is this idea of building a landing zone. So making the platform minimally viable from an infrastructure and a governance perspective so that you can begin to build successfully on it. From there, we're really focused on 3 tracks of work here, and that's enterprise management, the ongoing maturation of the platform from an IT perspective. Solution development is all about building, I say, beautiful and useful things on the platform. And then business value, that's this kind of ongoing, to connect this back to the cloud assessment, this ongoing activity around measuring progress and focusing on the highest priority, biggest impact workloads within the business. So I'll just share a few concepts that kind of get you started on your way as you start to think about your overall Power Platform adoption strategy. The first, from a cloud assessment perspective, is understanding which workloads, which apps, which use cases, whatever you want to call it, you plan to migrate to the platform. And the idea here is to prioritize not based on your instinct, but prioritize based on consensus within the business around business value and then complexity of the workload. And the idea is to begin in the quick win territory so that you're proving value rapidly, but then over time to migrate into the big win territory. I have seen organizations that have deployed Power Platform solutions to run quite literally billions of dollars, pounds, euros, etc. through these Power Platform solutions every year. Next, let's talk for a moment about landing zone and what's wrapped up there. So I talked about the cloud assessment just a moment ago. These are the things that you need to be doing as you get started on the journey. But in order to round out the landing zone, it's important that you, one, use those big plans you've made to establish the landing zone, to deploy the technical services necessary, your environments, your data loss prevention policies, your security model, sound and proper ALM and monitoring tools. Get that right up front, and then you'll be able to build solutions much faster. And then another mistake that I see some organizations making is taking the approach of, hey, let's just build infrastructure and governance for its own sake. And I can't tell you enough how not useful that is. It's so important when you're first getting started with the platform that you build and you develop a proof of value solution alongside your infrastructure so that you're testing and validating the pieces that you've put in place from a landing zone perspective. Next, enterprise management. The Power Platform Adoption Framework, again linked earlier, sets out a very useful model for enterprise management and governance of the platform, which includes technical infrastructure. So it's organized around these 5 pillars and 22 dimensions that sit beneath those pillars. So I really encourage you to get familiar with those and make sure that as you plan and you mature and you deploy technical services on the platform, please make sure that you're accounting for each of these dimensions. Even if one of them doesn't apply to you, it's important that you make a conscious choice to set something aside and say, yeah, that we're not going to focus on citizen developers today, or we're not going to focus on, well, gosh, I say focus on all of this, but the point is to make a conscious choice that you're going to count something in or count something out rather than leaving it to chance. So spend a lot of time here. And then finally, when we think about solution development, I want to take you through a few real life examples, a few architectural examples of how organizations have deployed this service to great effect, at least that I've seen. So my first example, I'm going to look at financial services. So think a big, highly regulated organization. And in this scenario, we're focused first and foremost on the business analysts, okay? They are the end user inside of the business that we're seeking to serve. So here we have, and by the way, the scenario here is all around product management and managing the regulatory burden within a financial services organization. So these folks are interacting with Power Platform-based end user solutions built in Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI to do their daily work. Dataverse is that single source of truth where all of that data across the organization's entire financial product catalog is aggregated. Line of business owners, decision makers are using a combination of Power Apps, say in a tablet or a phone-based format, and teams to create kind of this approval and collaboration loop around the data that is again stored in that single source of truth for data, which is Dataverse. We're using Microsoft 365 services to provide regulatory filings in whichever format the jurisdiction in which they're doing business prefers to receive that information. And when you think of the amount of time spent pushing paper around from a regulatory perspective, this is an insane efficiency. We're also archiving all of that data in SharePoint, a place that everyone knows and is very familiar with. And then we're using Azure Blob Storage to store not just auditing logs, actually, but file data, essentially unstructured data as well, because that's just a much more efficient way of stashing unstructured data rather than actually keeping it inside of the database. We can then extend this into the analytical space by pushing the product data and the analytical data out of Dataverse and into a data lake where we can splice that data together with, you see, data from industry data, say from a third-party provider, but also say from your CRM application. So your customer relationship management, say Dynamics 365 for sales, but it could be another service as well, such as Salesforce. So we're taking all of that data, we're pushing it into Data Lake, we're splicing it together, we're feeding it through Azure Synapse to obtain insight into the end-to-end business process and data where we have our product data or analytical data all spliced together with customer data as well. Next up, I'm going to look at a HR example from the public sector. So again, real-world architecture. Here we're talking about a series of user personas that we'll start with, say, applicants. So new people, whether it's a public sector government inside of a province, state, territory, city, county, or at the central or federal level as well. So we've got applicants coming into the organization. They're interacting with a Power Apps portal to manage their applicant data, authenticating through Azure Directory B2C. All of this data is again going to be aggregated inside of Dataverse. Recruiters are going to use a series of applications to interact with and work with these applicants. When data comes in, when applicant data comes in, say when a hire is made, we can seamlessly automate the process and feed this data into a big HR system that might be pre-existing so that we're not manually and duplicatively entering data. Operational planners are able to use their newfound personnel data to make plans, whether it's say for a military deployment or for shifts in a hospital, or planning coverage from a police department or public works department as well. So all of this data is put in the hands of operational planners. Personnel in the field are able to use just a series of mobile applications to get their job done, whether they're at the computer or whether they're out in the field. And then finally, we've got decision makers that are able to monitor the health and the readiness of their organization. I skipped ahead accidentally here, but I'll just say that in this scenario, I'm proposing, because I've seen this in the past, that we're using capabilities such as Azure Functions and Azure API Management to also push this data into third-party third-party data services as well. So say, I used the military deployment example a few moments ago, so this is timely, but other commands, NATO partners, if say this organization is working across nations or across jurisdictions, very useful there as well. We can then orchestrate and use this data connected to say a payroll system, us to orchestrate other business processes, and then splice it together again. I'm just throwing out some examples here: a call center or a hotline, or interagency reporting requirements as well. So I just kind of took you end to end on an incredibly complex system very quickly. But with that, I'm just going to conclude the presentation by sharing that HSO, my team, we're very, very focused on this idea of cloud transformation that's Power Platform led across three major service areas: cloud adoption, app transformation, and business impact. We work across a variety of industries, and we are holistically focused on the Microsoft Cloud, Power Platform, Azure, and Microsoft 365. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pierre, who I think has some questions that he's received, and we'll let our panel members answer them. So Pierre, back to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Andrew. A couple of questions. So the first one that I have was submitted by one of our clients in the manufacturing industry who has IT operations across several countries, small group in Canada, but also IT operations that are decentralized across several countries. So the question is, have you seen large-scale deployments in that industry, and any insights from an adoption perspective with a more decentralized IT organization?
I'm going to recommend, and she's like grinning because she knows exactly who I'm going to send this one to. I'm going to recommend we send that one to Azure first.
Sorry, not trying to cough in your ear. I have COVID. So I prior to HSO, so I joined HSO about 2 months ago, and I came from a pharmaceutical manufacturing background. So I spent about 8.5 years working in that industry, and I was one of the early adopters for Power Platform at my company. Same thing, we had like local IT, some global IT, like all over the place. So like local IT did not handle anything related to Power Platform. One thing for us was the platform was brought in, and that piece that Andrew was talking about setting your security, your governance, what citizen development looks like, was not done. So it was very much kind of this, I found this really cool tool, let me do whatever. And then IT wanted to come in and be like, we need to put some digital guardrails around. So I think that beginning piece of being able to set your what your enterprise architecture looks like is very important. But it did very much allow for us to be able to solve our own business problems. I had attended a Flow in a Day class back in like the end of 2019, which got me really interested. And it was something, things that I could automate for myself, routine tasks that I was doing for my team that I no longer really had to worry about. Nobody else had to worry about them either, which is really nice. Scaling it up, our safety department didn't have an official way to track safety, like adverse events. And so in that respect, we were using like a SharePoint list and old, SharePoint 2010 workflows, which were being phased out. And for them, it was they used one workflow to send an email to like all the managers at site. And we leveled it up to the point where people, just to keep it standard, I didn't turn it into a Power App, but so we could keep the interface the same for users, just had them submit SharePoint, but then went ahead and made like us, like a status log for our safety team in SharePoint so they could monitor things. They were manually creating, adverse event files and investigation files that they had to draft, and they were doing that manually. Used Power Automate in order to make that, give them automatic notifications, and then send this paperwork and the notifications to like the affected employee and their manager. And all they had to do was open up their email. It says, hey, you've been part of an event. When you're done, just press this button in this email. We were using adaptive cards and email. So when they said complete, it would send a notification to the safety team saying they've completed their paperwork, and it was on a loop. So if the manager hadn't filled out the paperwork, the employee, then it would continue to remind them and then set like the investigation overdue if it went beyond a certain point. That helped our safety team free up a lot of time. And then we reported it into Power BI just to see what type of events were happening, how frequently they were occurring. And it took a lot of manual labor off their plates. And then going into Power Apps, I built Power Apps for like our regulatory team, our quality team, so that they could monitor and receive requests for like regulatory impact assessments. And this helped previously our regulatory team and our change management team. These were all email requests. We would have we had a lot of siloed teams. So it was one person on each team, and they were receiving for a plant of 600 people where we're manufacturing about 6 commercial products, about 3 at any given time. There was a lot of movement going on. So you can only imagine the chaos that it would be, is all these email requests related to, I need paperwork approved for change management, whether it's a new request, extending a request, deleting a request, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of chaos, and it was hard to prioritize, and made a Power App where people could submit their request in an app. There was a log where, our regulatory or quality person, like this is same app, but 2 different sides, but they could go into request, see the priority, if it was high, medium, or low. They could respond, send emails from within the app. It would send notifications about progress, et cetera, et cetera. So it helped us do a lot, and Power BI was really where our site started, because you want to see your data, and I think that was the entry point into it for our site. But then when I joined, I ended up switching roles like into a more data focused, but they had me doing Power Platform. Then we're really able to level up and use more of like our workflow tools and our apps tools, just because we had somebody with the skill set. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it brought a lot of capability to a site where we had a lot of legacy systems. We're using SAP to do a lot of things that it wasn't meant to do. And so this is how we were making sure that we could still keep our applications that we were still using, but integrate them with Power Platform, making folks' jobs easier.
I think there's an element there as well. And I heard there was a question, part of that question was about decentralization. So one of the things to just sort of close that up with is to say, there's a number of different models having to do with centralization, decentralization, centralization of management of the platform, and then also of business functions. And I've seen global organizations kind of think of it as a spectrum across which, if you can push a lot of authority and a lot of capability out to the field, and that includes management and development as well. So there's different models to explore there, but organizations of many varying levels of centralization have been successful here. So Pierre, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the next question I have, I've combined 2 questions from different people, and Andrew's answered part of it, but I just want to repose it in case there's more to add. So a couple of our clients are looking at cloud modernization strategies, and they're moving a lot of their data onto the cloud. They're really rethinking how they're running their IT organizations. So any further insights on how Power Platform ties into a cloud modernization strategy?
Yeah, so I'll take a quick crack at this, just to say that earlier I mentioned the cloud adoption framework, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and the various approaches that Microsoft puts forth for an app modernization program. So one option, kind of at the lowest complexity, but also the lowest return end, is to rehost. So rehost has a lot of, has several different substitute phrases or euphemisms. So rehost could be lift and shift, we call it, or IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. So those types of scenarios, you're basically just lifting something out of on-prem and you're dropping it into Azure infrastructure services. Once we get beyond rehosting, Power Platform really shines in its ability to reduce the cost of modernization, reduce the cycle time and the development time around modernization, and reduce the technical debt that you incur from that modernization. So anytime you're into a scenario where you're trying to refactor an application, maybe by integrating it with services such as Power Automate or Power Automate RPA, or you're into a rebuild or a replace scenario, chances are very, very high you're going to be able to do it much more quickly and much more cost effectively using Power Platform services. Pierre, you're on mute.
Here we go. Thank you, Andrew. The other one I have is kind of a request for almost I would call battle stories. So the question is, across the companies you've worked with, what are the biggest mistakes that you've seen in implementing the Power Platform? What are the repercussions, and how did you fix that when you encounter those problems?
Let's send that one over to Satish. You can take a pass on this if you want to protect the innocent, but go for it.
I wouldn't mention the name. So I would go through some of the scenarios. One is obviously when you're dealing with an enterprise with a lot of history, in means of technology, a lot of the legacy system. One was definitely the security aspect of it. So every time they would build an app, the first 3 months, 4 months would be replicating the security model. They would just say, okay, app is going to access security, so we need security built in for the users. Whereas the Power Platform Dataverse environment, the security is baked into the system. So no matter how you access the data, which venue you access the data, this aspect of security is built into the data itself in the metadata. So you're not involved in development cycle, but this company will just build apps, and vast majority of the time will be replicating their security again and again and again for each app. So moving to Power Platform eliminated that aspect of the rebuilding of security, and you always secure it, always from any angle. So as Andrew was saying, there was so many venues to access this data, push the data, but it all holds true to just having a secure infrastructure. And another part of is governance is another aspect. So I worked in the healthcare industry, where there's a lot of US, HIPAA compliance, and this technology, the Power Platform, the Azure, is naturally, they give the governance as part of the platform. Microsoft is giving you assurance of governance and failover and security. And I'll give you the famous example everybody talks about, the healthcare got go. What happened when everybody got on? The whole system tanked for like a week, because that's what you're looking at when you're on-prem and on your cloud journey. And that's Andrew said, it's a journey, because an organization has to journey from the start of moving. Even the lift and shift he talked about, those are the strategies that you avoid. The healthcare gov was an on-prem in system data. It was in a data warehouse. It couldn't handle, it couldn't have the elasticity, it couldn't grow and expand on demand, and that's why it crashed for a whole week. And those are the things that, as an organization, it's an extreme case, but it could happen to you. You might have this sudden change in global and infrastructure, and then you have an outage because you're not insulated to such kind of load or customer demand, or it's unforeseen. And the last 2 years have taught about that. So those are the aspects, challenges that as an organization you need to look into and plan for, and cloud strategy gives that. And even taking to the next level as a platform, why does Power Platform so much better once you get onto the lift and the shift is, once you get to even to the lift and shift, you're again dependent on designing the topography so it can elastically grow and handle your platform pressures. Whereas when you go as a platform as a service, Microsoft is saying that you're completely insulated from even thinking about this. We would take care of your global distribution, we'll take care of all your loads and pressures. So this, as a platform, it gives you a lot of security, governance, that you'll be up and running all the time across the world. And there is not a lot of issues with, worrying about, did I have the correct topography? So what will happen in the middle of the night where I have to get up and change my design? So those are the things that, the platform itself, the platform as a service insulates. And that's why it's a journey as you move from a bigger organization, as you move slowly over. And those are some of the examples I've really dealt with. I was not part of the healthcare.gov, but I've seen it on TV, so I can say that that I have seen it happen.
And I should say, speaking of scaling globally, we're all sitting here from our homes and offices in Canada, the US, and the UK today on this webinar. So we are ourselves speaking from that the perspective of having taken this to very large scale.
And
Pierre?
one more thing I'll add before we go is like comparing Power Platform to these competitors, right? There are other people in the field. And I see that Power Platform is the one that gives you governance a lot better than other platform fields that are there. Like, I've worked in OutSystems and all, for example. Those are other low-code environments, but they don't give you the governance aspect of it. They just let you as an enterprise deal with it. Whereas I think Power Platform does a really good job of encapsulating all that for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Satish. You might have answered some of this next question, but let me ask it anyway. This is from a client who's a large multinational. They have lots of legal entities around the world, including in Russia. So they're asking any insights on how to leverage and how to roll out Power Platform when you have not just multiple locations, but multiple legal entities across a large geography.
So I'll take a stab at that. And, I would have answered this question maybe without a caveat a little bit earlier. I cannot, but I feel the need to place a disclaimer on this and say, I cannot say which cloud providers will at any given time choose to pull out of which country for one reason or another. So that aside, being unable to predict the future, what I will tell you is that Microsoft, the Microsoft cloud is built upon data centers all over the world. And within Power Platform, we actually have, because Power Platform has been designed and created over the last several years with these types of scenarios, Pierre, that you mentioned in mind, Power Platform allows us to locate resources in many different countries and many different jurisdictions around the world. So there is a concept, for example, one of the core foundational infrastructure concepts behind Power Platform is the idea of an environment. And we can spin up environments left and right in a large organization. But I'm not talking about a few environments or a few dozen environments. I am in some cases talking about thousands and thousands of environments. And there's lots of reasons to spin up and use environments. One of them is to manage ALM, is to facilitate best practices around application lifecycle management. One is to create security boundaries, but another is to deal with local laws and regulations and data sovereignty. So if an organization, say a multinational organization with headquarters in Canada, whose tenant might be kind of home-based within the borders of Canada, if they need to spin up environments, again, these infrastructure building blocks for the platform in other locations around the world, say because they want their European customers for which, and their European legal entities to which GDPR requirements apply, they might want to keep that data and build those environments and those pieces of infrastructure inside of an EU jurisdiction, but they might want to do likewise for their Canadian or their American or their Chinese or their Russian customers, what have you, to which GDPR does not apply. So data sovereignty and local laws and regulations are actually, that is one of the key advantages of Power Platform, because absent a well-governed kind of platform-first approach, your legal entities are going to be keeping this data on spreadsheets and access databases and SharePoint lists, which are notoriously difficult to actually achieve, Pierre, what I think your client or your question asker is trying to go for here.
I was gonna chime in and say that
Please.
I'm currently on a project where this is the case, where we're working with a client who has a headquarters like in Europe, but a bunch of legal entities elsewhere. And this was a really big concern of theirs too. But like echoing Andrew's sentiments, it works out really well because you can set whatever you need per environment. And this client very much wants data sovereignty for the specific purpose.
Thank you very much. I have one last question. We only have 4 minutes left. This is a more tactical question. The question is, how much of a burden have you seen the rollout of Power Platform been on IT teams? And the context of that is cost and manpower from an IT perspective. Do you have any insights there?
Azure, Satish, you want to take a quick stab at it? I've got some thoughts, but I'll defer to start with.
So Power Platform, as I think I talked a little bit during the cloud implementation phases, it is just, it's key, turnkey. One of the turnkey implementation power of the Power Platform environment itself is to just set it up and run. It's a turnkey operation. You turn it, and then you have a lot of capabilities that are built into the platform that relieves a lot of pressure from the IT perspective. Pre-Power Platform, you're worried about buying the server, setting up the server, plugging it in, just to bring the ground aspect of it, just to get it up. A small website would be an enormous amount of activity involved in it. Whereas now the same IT concept of move to the cloud, where you just say, I want to turn on Power Platform and the capabilities of it. And it relieves a lot of, even take a simple example, like an older organization that's been around for a long time has a big FAQ, for example. And how do you convert this FAQ in the future? How do you envision it'll work? Simple Power Virtual Agents, you just point it to these FAQ and it generates a human translatable, understandable logic where it understands and talks, and it gives you that experience of, even people have used the FAQ with like 1,000 pages, can just get in there and type a question, and the virtual agent would automatically pick you the right answer and give you the answer. And these are like leverage a lot of pressure from the IT people, because they are the ones expected in this scenario to catalog and maintain and host and make availability possible, just to throw a small example. So it's a big relief of pressure from the IT side of the folks too. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I'll add I'll share some numbers just real quick. Earlier I shared some independent research, and the numbers that get borne out by analysts who specialize in generating answers to the question Pierre just asked, which is not me. You see numbers like return on investment of 188%, net present value of 6.1 million, and this was done in US dollars, so 6.1 million USD, and payback on the upfront investment sometimes in as little as 6 months. So that's what independent research will tell you. I want to dig I think this is the last question. So I want to dig just a little bit deeper and say that here's where I see it failing. Here's where I see IT organizations being crushed. And it is in places where they didn't take it seriously, and where they said, we're going to kind of see as we go. We're going to underinvest in enterprise architecture, ALM, security, platform management, monitoring. We're going to underinvest in that up front. We don't see the value in the landing zone. Lately, I'm telling people that the most important thing you can do to get your Power Platform adoption off on the right foot is to take that landing zone seriously at all costs. Take the landing zone seriously. If you do those things, that's how you get to the numbers. And that's where my cheesy little things behind the wall slide came up earlier. So I see organizations fail when they don't take it seriously and they underinvest both emotionally and financially. But I see organizations succeed wildly when they put their chips down on best practices and enterprise management, so to speak.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Chime in just 15 seconds with that one. I've seen an organization that I belong to that brought in Power Platform, and they didn't do this upfront evaluation of everything. Now they're attempting to require people to get 43 approvals just to create a flow or an app, right? Which is absolutely ridiculous. So I think there has to be upfront, you need to decide like what you want from an organizational standpoint, and then how much trouble you want to make people go through in order to use the platform, right? Instead of making it IT exclusive, because this group, they're like, yeah, we're told, come to us with all your suggestions. And they realized they were over inundated, right, with requests on how to build things. And then they decided not to do it, but then they're also making it very hard for people to create their own solutions. So that, as Andrew was honing in on, it's very important to make sure you have your structure right. So then, you know, you don't want to, I don't know if this company decided that they just didn't want folks to use the platform anymore and trying to make it as difficult as possible. It is, there is a chance there, but that's what you don't want to do after you've brought in such a useful tool. And then I think also just hearing from users how they are using the platform to solve their own business problems, to IT or not, right? Just having IT listen to what are the types of solutions folks are building.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew, Azure, and Satish for all your input in this presentation today.